Welcome to Podshots, episode 14. In this show, we're going to talk with Hilary Isaac. Hilary is a former CNN Philippines anchor, radio DJ, TV and events host, Miss Gold's Gym, and now an inspiration to mothers everywhere with her social media content. We talk about journalism, creating opportunities, Brexit, cocktail recipes, COVID conspiracy theories, fake news, and much more. So, tune in, enjoy, and leave us a rating and a comment if you like what you hear. Without further ado, please welcome Hilary Isaac. Doing big cocktails or shots. Did you decide whether you want to do shots or cocktails, Brandon?
Did I say shots? Oh, it's Brandon who said shots?
Well, I was planning on doing a cocktail and then I realized I forgot to get juice. So I'm just going to drink a little bit over some ice, and I guess I'll be the designated alcoholic and I'll do at least one shot.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah.
Right?
I'm just going to switch my angle here. I'm sorry.
This
because
is
my giant cat.
Oh God, yeah! I just opened the bottle and it went all over. But anyway,
yeah, so that's what happened to me earlier.
Yeah. It's one of those bottles, isn't it? It's kind of weird. Have you drunk this before? Have you tried it, guys?
I've never had it.
I've had it before. It's pretty good. I like it. We were talking about aviation gin, though, weren't we, last time? But Hendrick's is a lot smoother than aviation gin. It goes down smoother.
Ah, good to know. Yeah, because we were talking about, we were going to talk about Ryan Reynolds on one of our episodes. I don't know why we didn't bother in the end, but but yeah, aviation gin. We've wanted to try that for some time now, but now that you mention it, I don't want to try it as much anymore.
Okay, so do you guys do you do bourbon or blended whiskey?
Yeah, we've done some whiskeys.
Okay, so but not single malts though. We're talking like peaty bourbon, like Kentucky type whiskey.
I don't think so.
I'm not that into it, to be fair.
Right. So if we were to compare aviation gin to Hendrick's in terms of, by the way that I would compare whiskey, I would say that aviation, though it is more expensive because I guess Ryan Reynolds, I don't know, it was a lot peatier. It was really hard to kind of like drink it in, but it was good. I mean, the flavor was on point, but it was a little sharp.
Right. Interesting. Good to know. Well, we're still going to try it. I think we're still going to shoot for Ryan's sponsorship.
Yeah, no, it's worth it. I tagged him when I got my bottle. I tagged him, but I think it's because I'm on private. He didn't bother looking at it.
Yeah. That's what it is. Yeah. He just got so many messages.
Yeah, true.
By aviation gin, and then have Ryan Reynolds do like a voiceover for.
Oh my God. Yeah. To introduce it. That would be so funny. Oh, he would probably do that too. That's why it's funny. He would probably actually do that.
He would. You never know.
Yeah. But it's great to have you on, and I'm so excited. I mean, like, I've known you for quite a few years, I think. And we've, I'm aware of the things that
5 years. I think we met 5 years ago.
Yeah. I met you in Gold's Gym. Of all places on this planet, I met you in Gold's Gym.
Right. Now that I think about it.
No offense to, because I actually like Gold's Gym. I subscribed to Gold's Gym when I went to live in Tokyo, and it was amazing. It was so clean and modern, and the equipment was new. And I feel like this is something to do with franchise owners, because I signed up for the Philippines Gold's Gym, and the one that I went to where I met you, I'm sorry, but it was really awfully managed.
Unfortunately, I can't express my opinion on that.
No, of course, but no, of course, because you were Miss Gold's Gym.
I was indeed in 2016.
Yeah. How did that come about? Like, did you actually get approached to be Miss Gold's Gym, or did you just go and try out for it?
Well, I was prepping for a bodybuilding competition, and I think I had just finished my second competition that time. So I was getting ready to be off season, to enter into off season and not really prep or diet or anything. And then one of the trainers at Gold said, you should join the body convention. I'm like, what is the body convention? It sounds so sketchy. I'm like, is that like a soft porn meet and greet kind of like, you know what I mean? Like the CES in Vegas where the consumer electronics sort of thing. And he was like, no, it's a health and wellness, like fitness competition. We're looking for a brand ambassador, a fitness ambassador. So I said, what do I need to do? They're like, nothing really. I mean, you live the lifestyle. You live the Gold's Gym lifestyle. I'm like, what exactly is the Gold's Gym lifestyle? You stay fit, you're active, you're strong. And I said, yeah, sure. Why not? But the week prior to that, I was at the beach with a girlfriend of mine, and we just went all out, like an entire pizza to ourselves. One for her, one for me, beers, just like whiskey. So I was not dieting for it. And I said, oh, crap, well, I got to do this. So whatever. They're not looking for a bikini athlete anyway. So I went and I did it, and I think I killed it at the Q&A. And then, just because the guy was looking at my tattoo, I have a tattoo over here. And his eyes were there, and I was just like, okay, Bobby, eyes up here. And they just thought it was hilarious. So and then I won it. Like I wasn't expecting it at all. And of course the posing that I learned during my bodybuilding competition really helped a lot because it was projection on stage. So, and that's how it happened.
But you're not like a stranger to being on stage anyway, though, right? I mean, you've been on stage quite a lot. You used to, you used to host, right? You used to host big events before.
20 years as a TV and stage personality. That's something that just comes naturally. So my dad used to tell me, like, you talk so much, you should, make a living talking. I was a kid when he said that. Like I would think I was 12 or 11. And I said, that's not a bad idea.
Wow. That's like, manifestation right there.
Exactly.
But you were also, and it's funny because I'm sorry for kind of going straight through like your credentials because there is a lot of them.
Fine.
But one of the things that we really want to talk to you about, like we really wanted to get into detail with, is something that I think is quite an important topic these days. Is more or less on the subject of whether journalism is dying. And you've been a journalist for you've been a CNN anchor
several years.
How long were you with CNN for?
CNN was quite brief because it was a licensing agreement with them. I was with the same network for a few years, but it went through several name changes. But we were the same network. So it wasn't like we were the Manila bureau. It wasn't like that at all. You know how they have the Hong Kong bureau and the Japan, whatever, but it wasn't like that. It was a licensing agreement where the contract was for us to be able to kind of use their name and be licensed to be known as CNN Philippines. So that was a brief stint, and I was on my way out. I somehow in the back of my head, and I guess in my heart, I knew my diaspora from the Philippines was impending. I kind of knew in my heart I was meant to leave, and it wasn't for a lack of love for the country. I just knew somehow I wasn't destined to stay there. But I mean,
why do you
journalism,
think that is?
I don't know. Ever since I was a kid, so I was born and raised in the Philippines my whole life, but I've always felt that sense of like displacement. So my parents put us in an American school, in an international school, really. And that was when I felt the most like understood and at home. But when I would get home from school, it was a struggle kind of connecting with the local scene. So I tried, and it took years. I think that in college was when I got really proficient with the colloquialisms of the Philippines. Of course, I can speak Filipino, I can speak Tagalog, and I've gotten so much better as the years went by, but it was a struggle growing up, not kind of being the same as everyone. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's hard when you're a mutt.
Yeah, when I was living there, I mean, oh God, it's amazing how You can understand what everyone's saying, but you can't communicate properly unless you know the local dialect. And because for people that are listening that haven't really been to the Philippines or never thought about it, you can go there as an English speaking person. You can understand everything, in a conversation. They can understand you because English is almost like the first language there, like tied with Filipino, right? But there's all these expressions, like you said, and these kind of colloquialisms. So if you're not fully aware of them, you're not going to be able to communicate as well as you could. And I never learned them because I just didn't feel the need, because I could communicate. But I feel like if I had learned them, I would have gotten a lot more out of my experience there for sure. Absolutely.
I agree. So I feel the same way. And the nuances too, let's not forget,
Yeah. I think, where Brandon and I have rented an office, Brandon rented it recently in Medellin in Colombia. And I've been egging on Brandon to learn Spanish.
Oh,
yeah. Because I feel like if man, it's the only way. It's the only way to do it. Like you gotta do it. So I saw your Spanish earlier, bro, in one of your tweets. I was like, yeah, that's my boy.
Oh, that's sweet.
I don't want to learn a new language, which is probably the wrong attitude, but I don't know. Spanish is not like overly difficult to learn. I haven't really tried learning anything else or been exposed to a culture with a different language yet, but it's probably essential. I really do need to pick it up. Clement's right. But you'd be surprised. There's a lot of people that do speak English down here, especially when you're in the bigger cities or more touristy areas, like Medellin and Colombia, where I'm at right now.
Okay, I was about to ask,
It's not like you can't survive or can't get around or do anything. So like I can get around speaking English and get things done just fine, but there's a benefit to knowing Spanish, being able to speak a native language wherever you're at, the kind of being able to.
Funny story about the Spanish language. And this just happened like 30 minutes ago when the Hendricks got delivered.
Right.
Okay. So we have, like Uber Eats, whatever, right? So it's something like that. It's like the Uber Eats of the liquor world. We have a store called Total Wine and they deliver. And the man, I was like, oh man, what time is he going to get here? He delivered like 10 something. I think I messaged you. And he gave me the box and I noticed he had an accent and it might've been a little presumptuous of me. But I said, muchas gracias, señor. And he was wearing a mask and his face just lit up like, ¿hablas español? I said, sí, un poco. And he was like, ¿de dónde eres? I said, soy Filipina, pero mi madre es española. And he was just like delighted. It was like utter delight of that feeling of like, someone speaks my language.
Yeah.
And he said, de Venezuela, he said that, and then I go, I think he says something like, es muy importante de tú conoces two languages. You need to know two languages. He was just the cutest man ever. And then I said, that's so true. And then he said, oh, and one more thing for my service. He pulls it out of his pocket. He gives me 2 Kit Kats. Like I'm supposed to tip the guy, right? But he gives me 2 Kit Kats. Right. So I said, muchas gracias, señor. And then as he walked away, I said, cuídate, hasta luego. And he said, y tú también. And he was just, he had a spring in his step. He was quite sprightly as he left. So.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, it makes people's day when they feel like they're, acknowledged, I guess.
Yeah.
That's really cute. He gave you 2 Kit Kats. That's no small deal. That's like, that could be, his snack for the day.
That's true. I was like, well, come on in. I just made brunch, but instead he gave me Kit Kat. So I'm like, okay, I'll take it. It's very sweet.
Oh my God. Yeah. So we got the alcohol too in time. That's like I think this is the first episode in probably 3 or 4 episodes that we've all had the same drink.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, we've had some serious logistical issues trying to get, synchronized, which is why our titles for each episode are quite long recently. And Monkey 47 and this. Yeah. But,
and a monkey?
So like on a recent one, we did Monkey 47, Jen. which is actually super nice, by the way. If you're looking for a very nice gin that's light but has very strong scents and flavors.
Yeah.
It's like flowers.
Sorry?
Oh, it's like floral, like scented. Ooh. It tastes like flowers when it goes down. It
does taste like flowers, man. Like super. So definitely try it if you haven't already. That one was my favorite so far, I think, out of all the drinks we've had. But this one's good, though. I mean, what do you think about Hendrick's? I actually like it. I think it's a decent gin. It's quite strong, unless I put too much in here.
Well, the thing I think about Hendrick's is because it's smooth, it creeps up on you. So you're like, oh, this is great. It's easy to drink. And later, you're 3 sheets to the wind, and you're like, what happened? Who won the World Cup? I don't know.
Yeah. That happened to me. That happened to me last episode. We were drinking Monkey Shoulder. There's too many monkeys on the show. We were drinking Monkey Shoulder, which is a really, really tasty whiskey. It's got some interesting spicy, sugary notes to it. Yeah.
Where's it made?
It's made in Scotland. Scotland.
Scotland. Okay, stop. That is like my favorite accent of all time.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, it is.
You should go there sometime.
We could do Scottish accents for the rest of this, but I don't know if people are going to really buy into that.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. But I mean, we could just, after this, just keep talking in the Scottish accent.
Okay, we'll give it a shot. We'll probably be in the mood anyway.
That's true.
Your son will be like, what is wrong with you?
At some point, I'm going to have to walk you back down with me or I could just disappear for a few seconds to get me more gin because I left everything downstairs at the bar.
It's absolutely fine. We've had intermissions before. This is all good. It's all good. So yeah, like apart from Gold's Gym and then the hosting stuff with the CNN, I mean, we were talking about that, which I want to come back to in a second.
Yeah, sure.
What are just so people know, because I'm going to introduce you, or we're going to introduce you anyway, but just so they hear it from you, like what was your focuses when you were back living in the Philippines? You told us that your father said, "Oh, maybe you should get a job talking." Right? Did you go on the radio?
I was on radio, and I think that was definitely my longer running stint where I was really known, because I was a commercial model. In the West, being a commercial model is not a big deal. Like TV commercials, no one watches them. But in the Philippines, when you're a commercial model and you're seen everywhere, you're pretty much a star. So growing up, my sister was really popular. She was a famous actress and she was a famous commercial model. So I felt like I was living in her shadows, right? But she said, no, keep going to auditions. One day your star will shine. And I was like, oh, whatever. I'm the ugly sister. But, she was right. Like the year came when it was, I guess, my year of favor. I did like seven TV commercials and 10 multimedia prints. So it was just stunning to me. Like I was just like, whoa, okay. So I guess it does depend on who they're looking for and whether you fit the role or not. But radio was what got my name sort of more heard around. I was with K-Light 103.5, which back in 2005, God, it's so long ago, right? Was it was one of the 3 biggest radio stations. So it was 107.5 New Rock, and then 99.5 RT, and then 103.5 K-Light. And I was with K-Light, and since I was a newbie, they gave me the graveyard shift. And it was pretty much anything goes. So I would take a bottle of rum and my guitar with me to the studio. I was like, my boss isn't listening anyway. So I'm like drinking and like playing the guitar, and people would call into the show and the guy was like, I'm going to bust out like a blues bass riff. I want you to like kind of play with me. So we were there like jamming on air. It was definitely fun. Yeah. And then I, in 2000, I want to say, was it 6 or 7, 2006, I moved to Jam 88.3. And I had a few partners. I had a few different shows, which are awesome. Like they gained such a huge following. But I think the biggest audience base was when I was with James Crawford. Did you ever meet him?
Yeah, the name rings a bell, actually.
So his DJ name is Scotty. They call him Scotty. That's his nickname.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
No, I don't know if I did, but I've heard the name before. Yeah.
We call him Scotty because he's from Scotland.
Okay. Makes sense.
Yeah, but so I think his dad is British, or no, his mom's English, but his dad is Scottish, and I love his parents so much. And he was my best friend that time, and he's just hilarious. We had a really good chemistry. People thought there was like some weird sexual chemistry. I'm like, God, no. I was like, God, no, there isn't. So it was kind of like a funny, like, dude, girl, best friends, no sexual attention, but people want it to happen, but it was never going to happen. And we're always ragging on each other, making fun of each other. And it was great. I think I want to say there was nothing like it in Philippine radio at the time. We were basically like a TV show, but on radio. We were so sad. Clown, we were so sad. We were giving away prize money out of our own pockets. We were like, if you call now, you win $20. And the $20 came from our own pockets. It wasn't even like our radio sponsored it, like from our own paycheck. It was that sad and self-deprecating. And I think people loved that kind of candor, the kind of like candid humor. We were just being ourselves. We were being idiots, really. We would do shows drunk at 6 a.m. What? So you guys would have had fun doing that with us.
You know what? We would have. I would. Yeah, Brandon would have had fun with it. Yeah.
It's
well, I know how. Well, for you, it sounds like it was just like almost like passing the time, and you could do it anyway. So why not?
Yeah.
I know plenty of people that. And I'm not sure if it's just the Philippines, because they're only in the Philippines that I've talked to people about this, but I've known plenty of people in high level positions that just used to go to work and get smashed. And that was because they were so stressed with the job, and they were functioning alcoholics. They would literally be completely trashed and still being able to work properly. And I was like, that's a dangerous place to be. Luckily, a lot of them I have gone over that, but yeah. Alcohol. And
you've gotten over that? I want to hear this story.
Right. Yeah. Just kind of mirroring, my own personal history here.
It's your turn to shine. Tell us about this.
Yeah. I'm just calling in for a friend.
Sure. Asking and calling for a friend.
Yeah. So was the DJ stuff before you started doing the CNN anchor?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. So I was in radio for 7 years. And then I became a mom. 4 months after my son was born, I decided to retire from radio. It was just tough. You have a newborn, and my show was 6 a.m. So I would be at the studio at like 5:30. So I had to choose. And at that time, the mother instinct was so much greater. Not to say my boss tried so hard to make me stay. He was like, I will quadruple your salary. I'm like, that's great and all, but like, this is a human being that just came out of me. So I feel like this is more urgent, Yeah. And then I took a sort of a hiatus from media for, I want to say, so I left in 2011 for a full year, and I worked in the, believe it or not, hotel industry.
Right.
So yeah, it was so strange.
I had no idea.
I had no idea I would do it. I worked for a 5-star hotel as the business relationship manager. Such fancy words for someone who wines and dines companies to convince them to fork over money for our projects. But it was great. I had caviar and foie gras for lunch every day. So can't complain.
Not bad. It's not
right?
bad.
Not bad. It's not too shabby. And then 2013, I got a phone call, someone saying, are you still interested to go back to TV? Would you ever do it again? I said, yeah, I might. Why? There was an opening, but here's the kicker. It was for a network where they only spoke Filipino. So
you had trouble with that before.
I did. I still did at the time. And I said, okay, well, if it's a talk show, I can converse. If it's conversational, I can get by convincingly. But so they said, yeah, we'll start you off with that. And I did well. But then the head honcho said, this girl's got talent. Let's put her in the primetime morning news show with me. So right? Exactly. I was like, oh my God. He was like, don't worry, there's script. So I'm reading it off the prompter and I'm like, I got this. And I thought to myself, so I started watching local news programs, and they all just sound angry. I don't know if you ever noticed that, but
Yeah.
right? Like, it's like, wow, it almost sounds German to me. They just sound, it's like, German, they're so angry, they need fire.
Yeah. We always joke about that too.
Exactly. I was just like, why are they so mad? It's already bad news. Lighten up a bit. The guy needs a shot or something.
Yeah.
So I thought that I had pulled it off until a friend of mine texted me and said, you actually pronounced that word way wrong.
How people like that though in the Philippines? They like it when people are like not from around there and they're interesting.
Well, not for their demographics. Their demographic was more of the grassroots people who knew the pulse of, everything. Like they were like testing my credibility and my legitimacy for the job. But I think the fact that I was very, open to learning and open to correction. And I was very coachable and teachable. I'd like to think that I still am teachable. I think that's what endeared me to them. And so I stayed with them. I'd like to think that
too, but let's be honest.
I mean, I try, right? I try.
I'm not teachable. Yeah.
I feel like age will soften you that way. I keep forgetting that I'm 39, that I'm turning 40 next year. In my head, I'm still 27.
Yeah. You know what? No, it doesn't look like
Brandon, in my head, I'm still 27. That's probably my favorite age. Yeah.
You're not turning 40. You're just turning 20 for the second time.
Yeah.
Thanks, man. I'll hear you forgot your knife. But yeah, no, it was definitely a leap. And then after a little under a year, I decided to leave them just because the workplace kind of got a little too toxic for me. There was so much red tape, to be quite honest. There was so much red tape going on in there, and it was horrific. I left. And someone called up and said, hey, this network is looking for an English-speaking news anchor. I said, man, I might as well try. I sent in my resume. 15 minutes later, their HR called me. 15 minutes later. And she was like, when are you free to come in for an interview? I'm like, tomorrow.
Desperate.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm joking.
Yeah, no, I mean, at first I thought like, wow, they must be doing so badly that they would want me right away. Like, I'm sure there are so many more qualified people to do this job. So I came in the next day, and what was supposed to be like a 20-30 minute interview turned out to be a full-blown audition. I had hair and makeup done. We did like screen testing. And then the next day I was called in to sign a contract. So, but then I begged, I said, I need at least a week to transition. They said, yeah, sure. A week is fine, but like not more than a week. Like they really wanted me to start right away. I went to Singapore by myself for a little solo trip. I visited my friend, Constance. She's French, but she lives in Singapore. Love her, rugby player. So we kind of just like went and looked around and, enjoyed the city before I started a whirlwind sort of full-time job in journalism. So that was that.
What, because I've always wondered this, but when I was thinking of questions to ask you, something came to mind. I was like, how do media outlets like yours, like before, get to decide what to talk about? What's the curation process? Are you involved? Is there some investigative aspect to your job? Are you like part of the process, or do you just kind of read off whatever they ask you to?
Mm-hmm. The network has been so good about inclusivity in terms of current events. But we have it. I feel like every news network has a dedicated team that does exactly that, feelers, right? So you see these news anchors, and the senior ones, I don't know if you've ever seen The Morning Show. Have you seen The Morning Show on Apple TV? That series. Yeah. Pretty explosive, yeah. So when you have headliners like that, where they've been in the industry for, I don't know, more than a decade, they do have the say in what is discussed in their program. But how things were when I was there, we have a dedicated team already. We've got our research team, we've got our pool of editors and our producers, and they're the ones who work tirelessly day and night to vet every story. We've got a bunch of fact checkers that really trace everything back and make sure that all the info and the data given us are correct. So as much as we are given the liberty and freedom to share what we want to talk about, they're way ahead of us on that. So it's not like we're just dumb talking heads. It's not that. And that's what sets you apart, really. There are people who will just read off a prompter. And there are people who will actually ask for a pre-read, which is a copy of the script for the day, which is all the stories, and then do their own research, which I'd like to think I did my due diligence during my time.
Why? Because they might choose at the end of the day that they don't want to talk about it, or?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh. Right. So I feel like the whole radio industry has helped prep me for this, because when you're doing news, you have your earpiece, right? So that's a way for your producer to yell at you, to tell you what to do, or cut to this, or that's wrong, or like 86 that story. So you have your producer yelling at you in your ear. You have people in the studio behind the camera throwing signs at you. You have a floor manager, and you have people sending you pieces of paper with updates. So it's kind of like an orchestra, and it's chaos, it's pandemonium. But because you're in front of the camera, you have to stay cool, calm, and collected. Yeah. So it's kind of like an acting job while staying authentic to the stories. And just making sure that what you are delivering is correct as much as you can. But there's only so much you can do behind a desk if it's live. So you're really depending on a team that does their own research and vets everything that comes through them.
Does that make it hard to be authentic, having all those moving pieces, kind of like pulling you like a puppet almost, to kind of make sure that, you do this right or that right? Does it feel like it takes away from your authenticity or the way that you like interact with someone or talk about something?
That's a great question. I once had to interview a politician I did not like. I did not believe in his policies. I did not like the way he ran things, and his track record was terrible. But they chose me to interview him live, and I am a bad liar. It's all over my face if I don't like someone. So it took everything in me to not roll my eyes like, oh, God, this guy like lying through his teeth, But you're right. It is a challenge. You're walking a tightrope in terms of authenticity, because everyone's saying, make sure you ask these questions or ask those questions. But what I appreciated about the network that I worked for was that their drive was always to stay as true and authentic to the story as it comes. They definitely gave us room to be our truest selves during the interview, but they always made sure, hey, so this is not the avenue to air out your personal opinion, because what we're trying to do is get the story out of them. So if you have your own opinion, you may find other outlets to express that. But within these four walls of our network, unless we specify that you can get into a debate with him and air out your own feelings, you'll have to stick to facts. So I feel like they had pretty good safeguards in terms of that. It was like baptism by fire for me. I'm a very emotional person. Soy muy emocionante, and I really speak from the heart. And I used to shoot from the hip a lot, but over the years I've learned to really pause and stop and think and look at all sides before formulating my response. But you're right. There are a lot of moving pieces, Brandon. I cannot tell you. When you're sitting there, bright lights in front of you, and hands flailing, and like the clapboards and like papers being thrown at you and scribbles, and you're like, what the hell does this mean? This is like chicken scribble. I don't understand. Or when you just told people that a certain military siege has acquired 20,000 people dead, and then you have to now backpedal and say, sorry, it's not 20,000. It was actually only 12. Like having to recover when you've given a piece of information that was incorrect. It's definitely a high, steep learning curve.
Yeah. There are very different approaches to reporting the same stories across the networks. So, and I'm not very familiar with Filipino television nuances when it comes to media networks. But like, I do know, like, an example that many people always talk about is Fox News being ultra right. And then you've got like another network being more left, maybe CNN.
And then you have CNN International that's like,
right. Yeah. So, you know, there's definitely an agenda there. Like, what do you think's driving that? Is that like, you know, coming from way above?
You know, I want to say yes, it's definitely a lot of internal pressure from the decision makers. But also, I don't think you would last very long in a company where your own beliefs don't quite align with them, because eventually it shows, right? Like you can't stay 10 years with a company unless your values are in line with theirs, because once something's got to give, you're either going to cave or they're going to change, which the chances of the higher ups changing their opinion and political leanings slim to none, right?
Absolutely. I mean, you got advertising, you know, kind of clients as well. I mean, Jesus, you know, you'd be shooting yourself in the foot. What do you think about media today and journalism today? How do you feel like the landscape has changed since you were involved with it? You know, with social media really taking a foothold now and that kind of thing.
I'm actually quite devastated. I'm just balled over. I can't. We've heard this term keyboard warriors, right? But I feel like they've been given more power now, and it's such a huge web. Really, it's almost impossible to know where to begin unraveling all of that. I'm sure you've heard of the recent developments with Rappler, you know, the head of Maria Ressa being arrested for. And the thing is, you can't retroactively apply the law in terms of what happened with her, where they're saying, well, the libel and the slander and all that, like that law was not in place when her what's the word? Her network or her company had published it. And it wasn't even her making that claim. Her network quoted someone else that had published it.
Really?
Yeah. And so I feel like, I feel like the majority of the country feels the same way, in that she was totally framed. You know, this is the death of press freedom. This is the death of freedom of speech in the Philippines. And if you're going to ask me, is journalism dead? Like, it's definitely on a ventilator. It's on a breathing apparatus, just because it's difficult when you have an administration or a political atmosphere or where the government makes you feel like you are not free to speak freely, right, and truthfully. So it puts a lot of pressure. And this is like an age-old battle, but it wasn't ever this ugly, I don't think. The last time I remember it being this bad was in the 70s. Of course, we weren't around yet, but during the Marcos era, where this is totally mirroring that. Martial law, where the press was being strong-armed into really choosing what to put out there. And people truly gave up their lives to fight for freedom. I think, honestly, a bunch of us are babies these days, where we're such snowflakes about things. We decry a lot of things, and we're keyboard warriors. But back then, everything was expressed and paid for in true blood, sweat, and tears. I was part of I think this was in 2001 or 2002, the People Power Revolution. I had played hooky from university that day, and my parents were in Hong Kong. My then boyfriend and I we were on EDSA, which was I guess you would call a freeway, back in Manila, and we were protesting a president who was caught laundering and embezzling money, and he was the incumbent president at the time, you know, and it's not ever going to be like that again, I don't think, just because social media has made it so easy for everyone to be tried in a public jury. So it's difficult. And I feel like the atmosphere is very similar here now, where in the United States, whether you support Black Lives Matter or not, whether you hashtag something, or even if you don't put a caption and you just repost something, whether or not you agree with it, it's just you put it out there for someone to talk about it, or because you're thinking about it. Immediately people decide what you are in their minds. You know what I mean? like I shared a story about this Black woman who was talking about, no, it's Black Lives Matter, is not in line with this. Or she was actually educating a Caucasian woman, a white woman. And she said, it's the Democrats. They've always hated us ever since. And the Blacks were conservative. The LGBTQ community is riding on the coattails of our true cause. I shared that on my Instagram, not to stir the pot. I didn't put a caption or anything. It was because it was thought-provoking to me. So I put it up there, and I had people come at me about this whole, and I said, listen, I didn't even say anything. That's out there, and I thought I would share it because I learned something. I learned that it was the Republican Party that actually abolished slavery, and I learned so much more in history, and I even learned how originally it was the Blacks who sold other Blacks as slaves, and how I read I came across a post about how it was actually white supremacist females who voted to erect statues and kind of revised a little bit of history and wrote about glorifying. And it was just like, wow, we're all learning in this process, but I feel like we would learn better if we spoke less and listened more. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know if you have anything to say about this, Brandon, because you're American and this is your country where it's happening as well.
It's a huge issue in America, to be honest. It's not something that's going to get solved. We've always been kind of divided in terms of opinions. Republicans have kind of taken on a lot of Southern ideals that used to exist within the Democratic Party. And a lot of parties, and both parties have flipped quite a bit over the years in the U.S. on a lot of stances too. But it's a huge issue that probably isn't worth diving into too much, but one of the biggest problems, and I think Clement and I talked about this a little bit at some point, was both sides aren't really open to thinking about things from a different perspective, or they aren't open to thinking more critically about what they're seeing and hearing. They'd rather just go with whatever the narrative is.
Right.
So if you try to talk about, you try to talk to a Black Lives Matter protester about how not all police are bad, they'll never want to listen to that narrative because they do think all police are bad. Or on the flip side, talking to a Republican about there being nothing wrong with, wanting to protest and maybe demonstrate by doing something with the American flag. They'll think that is treason in a lot of ways, and they'll want you to go to jail. So both sides seem very, at least in the U.S., closed off to what the other opinion is, or closed off to anything other than the narrative they hear, or take in every day. I'm sure that goes on in other countries too, but in the U.S. it's pretty pervasive. Not good.
Yeah.
Do you think it's coming to a head right now? I mean, with everything that's going on, obviously this is something that's, from an outsider's perspective, it almost looks like a pressure cooker.
The same stuff that happened in 2016. It's all about the election. If you pay attention, I don't like watching the news too much because it's so biased either way, either news station you watch. So I don't watch it too much. But when you do, it's like they always find a way to tie it back to the election. How are we going to defeat Biden? How are we going to defeat Trump? Blah, blah, blah. This is all the Trump administration.
Sure.
This is all, part of Obama's administration's previous policies. And it's just, that's all they're trying to do. They're just trying to use some political issue or create a political issue out of, modern problems to someone in the office have more power influence. And it gets really boring and really annoying. And, this stuff will die down after 2020. It'll go away for a year or two, and then it'll come back again. It's very cyclical in America. We always think it's the end of the world. Everyone starts panicking. We think our country's going to go to civil war, and then it dies down.
That's a pretty
true, actually.
cycle.
You know, on that vein, someone said something like, "Aren't you worried about what next year is going to look like with COVID?" And someone goes, "No, because next year isn't an election year." And I just thought, like, shots fired. So true, though. You know, a lot of it is politically motivated. I didn't quite understand it as well as I do now that I live here, and essentially on my way to becoming American. My husband's American, and a friend of mine actually, because I posted that story, she said to me, "Wow, I had no idea you had switched to red. You used to be hardcore blue." And I said to her, "I don't think I was ever like true blue. I feel like I've tried to see the value in both parties, you know, because both sides always have a value to something." And I said to her, I was neither here nor there in terms of being like hardcore or anything. I don't want my political leanings and understanding to be motivated by a party. But wouldn't you rather that your political understanding personally of how you see things, wouldn't you want that to be the impetus or the drive into choosing what political party to support or what candidate to support instead of it the other way around? So I said to her, well, you know, since living here, I've been living here for 3 years. I think I'm starting to see more things and I'm trying to understand things. And it's so different. Oh my gosh. From when I was living in the Philippines and only seeing things from a lens of what's being fed to me. But living here, being with the people here, seeing how things go, being frustrated with my governor. I mean, like things like that, definitely a game changer for me.
Here's a good question. So do you think journalism should be completely apolitical, you know, unbiased in every way? Or do you think that there should be a diversity of opinion in journalism?
Well, you know, you definitely do not want to impinge on people's rights, like the freedom of the press, the fourth estate, as they would call it, right? You don't want to impinge upon that. I would want to protect the freedom of the press. But on that note, like what you said, I do agree. I would desire that journalism be apolitical, just because that keeps it a level playing field. It makes it easier for people to decide for themselves. But you have this machine that just vets and fact checks everything and says, well, there seems to be an emotional quotient here, or, you know, this article, it has an emotional tangent, so we're going to take that out. And it's so hard because humans, we're so complex. We're such complex creatures, and our relationships, the way we think, like everything is so messy now. We're like a bowl of soup. It's not like before where you read what's on the papers and you want to make sure everything's correct. But now it's whoever gets the story out first. That's what's important. You know, like it doesn't matter if you're right. We could always backpedal and do an editorial and publish an erratum, but it doesn't matter. Get the story out there. Like someone gave birth to a really hairy baby. The story comes out, well, she gave birth to a monkey. Do you know what I mean? Like,
too many monkeys on the show. Seriously.
No, okay, we're back to full circle. But do you know what I mean? It's like the telephone game. Did you ever play that when you were a kid, where you fall in line and the teacher whispers a message and the last person, the person at the very front of the line will like say what it is, and it's completely different. She gave birth
Chinese
to
whispers,
baby.
we called it.
Is that what it's? Yeah. Oh, would that be racist though?
It's so racist, but I was half Chinese, and I was like, fuck it.
You can do it, yeah. I do a lot of like racist jokes here, but I'm like, hey, I'm the token Asian. You can't pull the race card on me. And they're like, exactly, oh my God, should we laugh at her? Yeah, they're like, can we laugh at her jokes? She's so funny, but is it racist if I laugh?
We live in the gray areas of life.
We sure do.
Chinese fire drill.
What's that?
The Chinese fire drill. It's like when everyone gets up and switches places as quickly as possible in any kind of situation. So like if you're, let's say you're at a stoplight and you yell Chinese fire.
Oh yeah.
And switch places, changes. Yeah, we used to do tons of that. We do it in sports too, called Chinese fire drill.
That's hilarious.
Can you imagine what the games in the 80s must have been called? Like Russian something, you know, like some hardcore Russian games going on.
But why should it be racist just because we associate the name? Like, okay, for example, the COVID, it's the Wuhan virus. Like, are their feelings hurt now that we call it the Wuhan virus? That's literally where it came from. Why is the Spanish flu still called the Spanish flu? Like, decades later, like, how is that? It's not racist. It's just,
I think, I definitely agree with you. Sorry, go ahead, Brennan.
No, that's go ahead.
It's the intent. It's like, are you saying it intentionally to hurt somebody? Or are you saying it from a factual standpoint? Are you saying it to be funny? And things get pulled out of context way too much. Like, I mean, if, saying that at any point ever was offensive or racist, and then we wouldn't have comedians. We wouldn't live by facts.
Very good point.
So, I don't know. There's a weird line there nowadays.
Yeah. I feel in that particular case, and I don't really get offended by stuff like that, but I feel like in that particular case, it already had a name. And so the mention of it being the China virus was kind of like a slap in the face, if you know what I mean. And there was a reason behind it. So yeah, I think it's intention, definitely. If there's no other good name out there, just call it by the country it came from.
No, when you said there was already a name, so to call it the China virus was racist. What was the name you were thinking? That COVID or coronavirus, or the Wuhan virus?
Well, it was already being referred, as far as I'm aware, it was already being referred to as coronavirus and COVID-19 before, the China virus started making waves for whatever reason. Yeah.
The first I heard of it was the Wuhan virus. That might have just been me.
Well, I mean, that's okay. There you go. If that's the case, then that's fine with me. But to go on national television and state to the entire media in the world that you're dealing with a China virus, especially when tensions are raging between the two nations, there's
so much color, right? There's so much color behind it. Yeah.
A lot of people died because of China regarding this, though. So, I mean, they're kind of deserving of it in some ways.
Absolutely.
Numbers, lied about how many people were sick and dying. They did nothing to quarantine it before people were from the country.
Exactly.
And their actions, on an international stage, where they have an obligation like every other country, think about the globe when it comes to something dangerous like that. Their actions led to lots and lots of people actually dying and getting sick. So by the time this is all over, when it's all over, they're going to have a lot of repercussions. And I mean, at least in the U.S., you can tell they're trying to pave the way to blame it on China. And as much as I don't like blaming someone else, I think they do deserve it in this case.
Mm-hmm. The funny thing is, one of my closest friends, she's a microbiologist, and she had told me about Wuhan a long time ago. She said, they're the ones that are equipped to study these biological, I guess you wouldn't really call them weapons, but these viruses, they have the lab to study it. And so obviously they would be the ones handling it. So she actually made a joke. She was like, so there's a rumor that at some point, some idiot from the lab will forget to decontaminate himself and then just decide to go for lunch somewhere and then release the Kraken. And then
I didn't wash my hands.
You know what I mean? No, seriously. And then this thing happens, and we looked at each other, and I said, "Oh my God, we literally were just talking about this last week." And she was like, "I'm telling you, it's a case of she believes that this was leaked intentionally."
So she really believes that then. Yeah, by the way, sorry we didn't cheers. We normally do that, but it was titillating conversation.
Cheers. What have you got in your drink? I need to know everyone's.
Yeah, I know.
Well, I know Brandon's
extra with
doing
mine.
shots.
Mine's ice and gin.
Hardcore, my
friend. Mine is blueberries and strawberry.
Ooh,
it doesn't make a difference. It literally doesn't change the flavor one bit.
Maybe you should muddle it first.
I know, right? Just mash it all in there.
Yeah. So I've got grated ginger, lime zest, lime juice, a bit of soda, club soda, and the gin.
Yeah. I think I tried to. I got this. I'm not sure what it really is.
Right? Oh, dash. Is that like soda water?
Yeah, it's like soda with some
Raspberries.
Raspberries. In my
do you know my son is actually he's half British, he's half English, right? And when he was younger, he's like, "Oh, mommy, give me the bowl." I was like, "What?"
Aw, so he doesn't have that anymore.
He doesn't have it anymore because he doesn't really see his biological father anymore. So, but when they used to spend time together, he would have those British inflections.
I know how that is. I've been affected by that.
It's a very classy accent. I mean, you guys can read off of a phone book and we think, wow, that sounds so intelligent and classy.
That's the thing. We're not really. We're clearly not. I mean, look at our prime minister.
Oh God, I know.
Yeah,
but it's funny because his biological dad, he comes from a town, from a city called Bolton, and his accent's quite thicker. He's a northerner, and so he's from the north. It's like 23. I was like, what? And everyone's like, what did he say? I go, he said 23. Like, I would have to translate his English to normal English to people.
Yeah.
It was funny.
Well, I'm in the north right now, in northern England. Yeah, so I know what you're talking about, but it's it gets worse than that. I'll be honest with you. There are harder accents to. Like, I'm in the city with one of the most difficult accents. It's Newcastle. And they have a very, very strong northern accent. So I grew up here, and then I went to study in London I was actually living in Spain. And then I went to study in London for I ended up living there for 5 years. And then I think 3 years in, I came back.
Yeah.
And I jumped in a cab, and the guy talked to me, and I didn't understand a freaking word he said. And I was like, I'm English? From this place. Like, I should understand you, but I don't. And then, so that was really interesting. But we, it's one of those places that it's in a really, because we've held on to a lot of the language from a long time ago. Like, we didn't used to, it wasn't always like that, English. It was mixed with German and French, and it was just this weird sounding language throughout the ages. And we've held on to a lot of that kind of sound in the city. So it's a very strange
It's fascinating. Language just fascinated me ever since, has always fascinated me ever since.
We get a lot of different accents in the U.S. too. Now that I think of it, very, very diverse amount of accents. It's weird. If you go to a different state, like depending on which one, it just sounds like you're in a completely different world.
Yeah. My personal favorite is the Boston accent. I really like the Boston accent. I think that's really fun.
Yeah, my daughter. Where are you from, Brandon? Sorry.
I'm from Oregon, actually.
Oh, not too far from me then.
Yeah. I actually used to go to Total Wine and More. One of my favorite places to go.
Don't you love Total Wine? It's like the candy shop for grown-ups. It has everything.
That's a really good way to put it.
So many funny stories about Total Wine and More in college, though.
You gotta tell us about that at some point.
No,
well, but you never mentioned that on our college special. We did a college special.
I should have.
I'm glad I wasn't on that show.
They were racist for a while, though.
You were what?
I really thought they were racist because I went in a couple times with my African American colleagues to buy Ciroc every once in a while, and they would never check my ID, but they would always check their ID every single time. This was in California too.
Oh my God, that sucks.
No, you know what I think it is you looked old.
No, I look pretty.
They never ID my husband because they believe he is old enough, but they always ID me. Aww, even in the grocery stores.
It's nice, isn't it?
They're like, you were born in 81? How? And I'm like, so is my husband. You're not going to ID him. They're like, oh, we can tell he's like old. It's funny.
Throughout my 20s, I used to get that now and again, and it stopped, and I'm actually gutted. I'm like, no, This isn't supposed to be happening to me.
Not yet. You know what's
Hey,
racist?
I was going to ask you, speaking of like, how things have changed a lot since, you used to do the actual anchor job and media. What are your thoughts about the emerging cultures with this new generation that we have, like the woke culture and, cancel culture? What do you think is like, do you think social media is in part one of the issues here for that kind of thing, taking a prominent stance?
100%. 100%. I think it's funny because I actually just posted on Facebook my status. I don't know if you saw it. I said, God, so much wokeness. It's so exhausting. I used to watch Dear White People on Netflix. Until I was just like, ugh, it's so smug. It's like being woke should not be a measure of your value as a person. But I feel like in this generation, it kind of has become that. Cancel culture, it's such an immature response, though, don't you think? Like,
it's kind of racist, actually.
It is. It totally is.
Series that said, what was it called again? Like, hey, dear white people. What if it was like,
dear white people. Yeah.
What if it was dear black people and telling black people how they act?
Yeah. You would not find any financial backing for that show.
That's one way to put it.
Right?
Yeah.
There's no way. Yeah, I'm actually quite tired of it. I know that I'm quite present on social because I post stories, I post pictures, or I'm on Facebook. But the truth is I'm on it to post to see what my family's up to. That's it. I am so exhausted. I don't even read what's going on because there's there's like Karens and Susans, like the poor innocent Karens and Susans of this world who feel they need to change their names, and it's hard. And it's funny because the friends that I've made here who are Caucasian, let's just put it that way, I have begun to sense a certain kind of defensiveness on their part where they're trying to be so careful they don't offend me. And I'm like, I'm so not offended, to be honest. Like you could make jokes that it wouldn't offend me just because I can take it the same way that I dish it, right? When my husband took me with him on a work trip, he had a huge company conference. We were in Boston, and they said, "How did you guys meet?" And I said, "Oh, he look in a catalog and he see." And it was so hard to keep a straight face.
That is freaking hilarious.
But Tim, my husband Tim, and I, we discussed it in the hotel room prior to going to the ballroom. And I was like, baby, how should we do this? And we love playing like jokes on people. He was like, let's prank them. And it was a mixed bag. So I go, so I hadn't said a word. These people know nothing about me. They see me, I think I don't remember if I had colored my hair that year or if it was like this, like natural, like all black. But I came down and be like, oh, this is your wife. How lovely to meet her. How did you guys meet? And Tim looked at me and I go, oh, he looking at catalog and he see me and he contact me. And I said, I give you a wholesale price. I'll give you a wholesale price. Me love you long time. You want control or I take control? And they just, Brandon and Clem, their faces, they were like, do we laugh at this or not? And I literally just stalled to make them squirm some more. My husband was just having the hardest time keeping it in. And I said, I'm just shitting you. We met through a friend. We've been friends for 10 years. And they were like, oh my God. And they were like, that was so good. And I was like,
that's one of the things I think today you're so cautious about offending people. There's almost no good reason for it usually. I mean Ricky Gervais is a I love him. I think, advocate for just saying how you feel, as long as you don't, as long as you're not hurting people intentionally or
don't be inflammatory. Deliberately.
Then just say what you really think. And if people have an issue with it, then that's their issue. That's their problem, right? I mean, we can't change. We shouldn't be responsible for how other people feel. It's totally it's the opposite of like why things are the way they are. So woke culture in that respect, I think, and all these cultures.
How do you guys feel about that?
How do you feel, Brendan?
It's really annoying. When comedians, especially your favorite comedians, have to walk on eggshells because of this issue, there's a problem.
Yes.
To make you to be controversial. So if they have to walk on eggshells, then that something's going a little too far. It's like, we know that there were problems 200 years ago. We know that, people have different opinions, and that's always going to be the case. I'm sorry you have feelings, but if you can't joke and laugh and, tear down walls and bridges, and then there's another dynamic to this issue. It's not just the fact that you feel sensitive to something. And I think that's the other half of it. People are oversensitive these days. I mean, I feel like
is that a Raiders hat?
It is Raiders hat.
I almost wore a Broncos top.
She's trying to decide whether to throw tomatoes at the screen or not.
Well, I wasn't really a Raiders fan until they decided to move to Vegas, because I'm technically from Vegas as of right now. So it's like my second home outside of Oregon.
Love Vegas.
Now that the Raiders are in Vegas, it's kind of like the first time I've ever had an NFL team in my own city, my own town.
Right. Yeah.
So I really hope they're good, or the hat's going to come off quickly.
No,
where were they before? Sorry, just as a complete noob when it comes to
Oakland.
Kind of thing. They were in Oakland.
Yep.
California.
Is it just because there's more money in New Zealand? Not New Zealand, in Las Vegas?
What?
Is it just because there's more money and prospects there for them?
I mean, if you're the organization, you've been struggling for decades, to be relevant. You stay in Oakland, or do you take the bid and go to Las Vegas?
Yeah, and live the life.
I'm not saying anything bad about Oakland, but Oakland's.
I love Oakland.
City. I do and I don't. I have friends from Oakland. It gets such a bad rap for, it's not as bad compared to some other places I know of in California, but they do have problems. And it's not the kind of city that's really going to support an NFL team like Vegas. They've been there for a long time. It's not working out. The franchise has the right to move. And Vegas is one of those cities that has never been considered a city because it's Sin City. A lot of that is attributed to not having a sports team. So we're like very, very passionate about sports now that we have it. Like our hockey team, the year they came to Vegas, we went to the Stanley Cup.
Nice.
The year we got a women's basketball team, I think they made a run at the playoffs. We overpour support into our sports teams because it really helps identify Las Vegas as a city and not just a place where you go to gamble, get drunk, and screw. Having a football team will do this, hopefully have the same effect. It's good for the community too. Like after we had the Vegas shooting, Vegas has really come together a lot more as a community, because it's always been like kind of dispersed in all different directions around the strip, and no one had really, there was no like community value until after that happened. So Vegas is changing very rapidly in a positive direction. It actually feels like a city now.
It's funny. I have a friend who was a police officer. I think he was in the SWAT team in Vegas. And with everything that's going on with the whole defund the police atmosphere, I mean, it's been such a difficult space to be in, because I have family who are police officers in the United States. I have family who are African American. I've got family and friends who are African American and in the police force. So do you know what I mean? Like it's a space that's so hard to navigate and find your way around. Like how do you express yourself?
How black police officers have to think these days about everything that's going on. And I saw on the body cam footage of the guy that shot Rayshard Brooks, which, I mean, it's a contentious subject, but he did fire a taser at him. I saw it with my own eyes. Which is
assault on an officer.
But you know, I don't know. I'm just saying, I do understand both sides of the situation. But like, you know, he was talking and mixing with black officers afterwards, and
here's the thing, though.
Know what happened? I mean, they were there.
If Rayshard was white and he shot the taser at the police officer, how would that have been met?
Well, I mean, yeah, it's definitely. You know, I think it goes both ways, doesn't it? This whole thing with race is going both ways to the extreme, but there is an underlying cause for it, and I'm aware of it, and we're all aware of it. We know that, you know, there is a disproportionate treatment in general, let's say, towards black people, and it needs to be addressed. I think unfortunately, a lot of people who are in those cultures that we talked about earlier have a very strong voice, and there's no real leadership behind the Black Lives movement, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah.
Which leads to problems. And I was listening to a podcast, many different podcasts actually, of very intelligent people talking about, you know, as far as I can see, as far as I can tell, unbiased people talking about, you know, the situation. Sam Harris, for example, other people like him, and talking about how crazy some of these, you know, requests are to dismantle police. You know, for example, in San Francisco right now, I just don't understand how that's going to work. It's almost like the Wild West.
Seattle,
sorry, not San Francisco. Yes,
Spokane provides them with, like, we give them electricity, we give them water, we give them power. We have hydraulic, you know, we have like dams here, and that's how we are able to power the city, and that is being fed into Seattle. So if they cut power and water off of Seattle, they wouldn't be so autonomous.
Right.
You know, so it's, I mean, and they're saying now that they're an autonomous zone, although they call themselves CHOP. Like, now what? Like, are you not Americans now? Should we require passports from you guys? Like, are you really autonomous? Can you grow your own food without needing the community to give you? You know what I mean?
I think it's just too fast, too soon.
Is there a huge dam there? Isn't there a huge dam at Snoqualmie Falls?
Yeah, so we have like a power plant, like a hydraulic plant out here. And honestly, it's such a self-sufficient city that even if the power went out electricity-wise, like, we would have hydraulic power to supply us that. And a lot of that is going into Seattle. And I think that's what's gotten everyone up in an uproar, because they're thinking like, well, you know, so much for Seattle wanting to be called an autonomous zone when they're asking everyone to give them stuff, food, money and drinks and like power. But if they cut the power, then what? Like, how... Did you see their version of gardening? They literally just like had boxes out there and they put soil in a bunch of seeds and started watering. Like, that's not how you grow vegetables.
It's far beyond that too. Like, I've had this conversation with a lot of my friends. Like, okay, let's say that all the states decide to secede from each other. Like, states would struggle because they depend on other states, or they depend on union to hold that together, provide them funding.
Right.
We always talk about how if California broke off from the U.S., it'd be the sixth biggest economy in the world because of its economic output. The reality is, you know, almost all of California depends on, you know, power coming from Vegas and Arizona through the Hoover Dam. They have massive pipelines pumping in gas and jet fuel and natural gas into California that they depend upon. You know, farming and agriculture comes from rural parts of California and is even imported in because of all the city life, and they don't produce much. If you cut off some of those states and you said they didn't have access to the resources that they were taking and paying for from other states, they wouldn't be thriving in those situations.
Yeah, agreed.
Let's say there was a civil war. Like, what states are going to be warfaring and which states are going to be so passive that they're not going to be able to support themselves?
Yeah.
I mean,
agreed.
Reality, California, if it broke off, it has tons of resources, but how many of those inner city people are actually going to be able to, create the same resources they depend upon from another state?
You're basically explaining a lot of the argument for staying in the European Union when it comes to the United Kingdom leaving. And people don't think, it's not that they don't think, they think, but they don't know all the facts. Mm-hmm. And if they knew all the facts, they might choose differently. And this is one of the issues we have is education. So all these people here who are making a big noise about, we need to do this because of this. And maybe you haven't heard all the facts. And if you heard all the facts, you wouldn't be making that choice, because ultimately you're not just choosing for yourself, you're choosing for everybody.
Exactly.
And that's a responsibility you have to carry, and you need to take it seriously. So it's clear when I talk to people that I know who voted to leave the European Union that they didn't know as many facts as maybe I do, and they're facts. They're not Brexit, right? And you've just touched on a lot of the same things that are going to happen here, which is we rely on trade deals with the European Union. We have a certain quality of life that we want to keep. And if we separate, it's almost impossible to maintain that. And, even with the NHS, which is the National Health Service here, you're talking about a large portion of that entire institution being built up from immigrant work, from foreign labor, from European Union countries because of the visa. And that's going to disappear too, probably. So what are we going to do now? I mean, there's just so many questions, and that's it. I mean, and the thing is here now we're talking about education, right? So it's not so easy to know the truth about something anymore, because there's so many different takes on it, so many different angles and twists and spins on something that,
right.
Fake news. I mean, what's your opinion on fake news, Hilary? Because obviously that's something that's real, but it's not true, and people believe it.
It's funny. There was an article that came out where they said that it's actually a lot of the senior citizens who are the biggest disseminators of fake news.
Sorry. I wish there was someone that was in that group here to represent themselves, but I just feel like it's true.
Without any disrespect, because I love her to death, I feel like my mom she falls in that category. I'm going to try and plug my phone in to charge. But I feel like she's in that category where she doesn't really think things through. And it's not because she's ignorant. I feel like their feelings are so urgent that when they see a headline that kind of mirrors how they feel, they immediately share it and then they read it after. And they're like, oh, crap, should have read that first, But fake news is just so prevalent because really, when you fact check, even you guys know Snopes, right? I mean, even Snopes is more of a democratically motivated group. So it's almost like, do you really trust them? I mean, if you're conservative, can you trust them to be still apolitical about their fact checking, or are they checking against their more left-leaning
I was actually wondering about that the other day. In exactly that. I was thinking Snopes is referred to so many times as a fact checker, but who's checking the facts checking of Snopes?
Who's watching the watchdogs, basically? I mean, I've always loved Snopes until they became a lot clearer with their political leanings. And so that made it a lot more difficult for me. Not because I'm going to say I don't lean hard far right, but just I want to be as not necessarily neutral, but as fair when it comes to access to information.
Yeah.
But on another tangent, Brandon was talking about earlier. I also want to speak up on the right to bear arms, where people are saying, like, we shouldn't allow people to be able to have guns or this and that. And it's like, well, the reason America wasn't conquered was because they were able to hold on to their, my son is here.
That's okay. Hey.
Asher, come here, buddy. Yeah. Come here, buddy. He's so funny. So do you want to meet my friend who is British? Like,
hey. How's it going?
I don't have a British accent.
You do not anymore, but you have that blood in you. Do you want to say hi?
Hi.
This is
It's all right though, mate. Yeah, we can put it on for her if you like. I don't really speak like that.
I never had a British accent, Mom.
You used to. Are you going to go play with Logan and Kyle?
Actually, nobody was out there.
No, you should knock on their door, is what TJ said. Go knock on their door. Go play.
It's cute.
Go play because Mommy's drinking with her buds.
Yeah, we're such a bad influence.
I feel like
you were
I'm
saying you're
better
right.
influences
You were saying
here. But
there was something interesting you were about to say about the right to bear arms in America.
yeah, no. So because America held on to that, they weren't invaded, and I don't know if you guys saw this, but in Idaho, remember when Seattle was taken over and they were saying, yeah, Antifa, they're going to go over to Coeur d'Alene, to Idaho, and they're going to riot over there. And then there were these pictures that came out of people, black and white and Hispanic, and they had their rifles, they had their semi-autos, they had their guns. They were open carry. They were walking around, and Antifa never came. And I was like, yeah, well, I mean, Idaho is 20 minutes from where my house is. And that's where I shop. That's where I go. My sister and her husband, they live there. We are a gun carrying family, and so we believe in the right to bear arms. And my son, he's not afraid of guns. He's been exposed to it. He's been taught. We've been trained. My dad has taught. We grew up in a household that was not afraid of guns. My grandpa, he's a veteran. He was, and he just, it's not alien to us. We're not one of those people like, oh my God, guns, that's terrible. That's the work of the devil. No, that's how you protect your home. And in the Americana sense of life, the story behind rocking chairs on porches is really the men sitting on those porches with their guns protecting their homes. When the whole war happened, they were making sure that if the Japanese came, they were ready to protect their homes. And you should watch this movie called Memorial Day. Sent my husband to tears. Brandon, have you seen it?
I've seen a lot of war movies, probably at some point.
It's that old guy, James Cromwell from, this is not a good comparison, but a reference, Babe, the movie, like the talking pig. He was the farmer. So James Cromwell. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so he plays the grandfather basically, and for that weekend he was babysitting his grandsons, and one of them came across his war chest, which had all the stuff from when he was, with, I think it was with Vietnam, I forget, but yeah, it was pretty intense. And I remembered my grandpa, and my husband was telling me, like, honey, that's the reason all these homes before have those wraparound porches and rocking chairs. It's because the men of the household would sit outside with their guns to protect their homes, and there was a line in that movie that said, my grandpa spoke with a sadness in his face and a vulnerability in his heart, because it was as if he was aware that his wall of protection was slowly melting away, because there was no longer that danger. The danger was now a different kind. It wasn't an army from another country invading you. It was more pervasive, more intrusive. And I was just in tears that night. And he was just like, you're such a sweetheart to understand and have a heart for something like this. So I'm like, I don't know. I have a soft spot for grandpas. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely something to think about. People are sensitive over the protests and they want to say peaceful protests, this and that. But you'll always have groups like Antifa who want to mess things up. for people who are peacefully fighting for change to take place. And so then you have the good guys who are carrying weapons, who try to put things in place. But then you have snowflakes who say, well, guns, they're bad. Think MacGyver. Do you guys remember MacGyver, the series?
I mean, there's one out right now, isn't there?
No way, Richard Dean Anderson.
No, it's not the same dude. It's a reboot.
It's not as good because Richard Dean Anderson, I've had a crush on him since I was in 6th grade, but he was always against guns. And I wondered why. I'm like, wow, he'll blow up the bad guys with an orange and a match. Like, that's amazing.
You know why he's against guns? Because they're not challenging enough for him.
Sure. I mean, I see the value in that, but at the same time, I feel like I understand it now. I understand why the right to bear arms is such an important amendment to protect, and I'm not trying to campaign for a certain political party or candidate, but I see the value in it. Because, for example, if I were home and my husband happened to not be home and someone decided to invade my property, come into my house, and it's just me and my son, like, what do I do, right? In terms of self-defense, as I guess a person of color, if I shot that man who invaded, who came into my property, where does that put me? Like, do I get arrested or is it self-defense?
Well, it's self-defense from your perspective in that situation. And that's probably...
Or does that depend on the state I live in?
It does, but if someone comes into your home and you shoot them, you'll generally get away with it because it's self-defense, but it does depend on the state.
Right.
It really does. Some states are more protective of your rights to bear arms while others aren't. Like California is very different. Like if someone broke into your home in California, you would have to be able to prove that they had intent to hurt you. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you were in Oregon, where I live, in my little town of 10,000 people, and someone broke into your home, you can shoot them on site.
Yeah, I like that. I'll move there. Where is that? What is your hometown?
Prineville, Oregon. It was actually really interesting with the protest because we had a bunch of issues with Antifa in Portland, and they were busting into businesses and causing tons of problems and burning police cars. And they decided to come to my little tiny town of 10,000 people, to Prineville, to protest for no reason. They just wanted to go to every single town and city and protest. So they came to my little town, and it was all over social media and the news too. My entire town came out bearing arms, open carrying, and counter protested by standing across the street with all their rifles, hundreds of them. Just make sure that they didn't do anything stupid. Like telling them to go back to Portland. If you throw a brick through a window of a local business, we will fire. If you do this or that, we will defend our town. And it's kind of scary at the same time, but it's also kind of cool to see that the town has that much pride to speak up for.
Yeah, for sure.
It's like, if you want to come to a town and protest, that's totally fine. You can say whatever you want. But if you do anything to hurt anyone in our town, we will fire, we will protect our town. Stuff
yeah, like it's a different story.
There's some values that still exist there in old America, outside the inner cities, that just you don't see anymore.
It's interesting, isn't it, how we have this duality of beliefs and behaviors of different generations and, different political kind of affiliations. And I mean, duality because, also in political sense, because there's only two parties, right? It's literally binary, right? Mm-hmm. Which I always found very confusing to me. And I even find it confusing to have 3 or 4 parties here in the UK. I just don't think it's representative of the overall reality of the situation. But anyway, that's another conversation entirely. But Antifa is almost like, I'm even trying to wrap my head around it. I don't even think there's any kind of semblance of logic behind Antifa. I think it's just anger manifested.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like it. It seems like they're just a bunch of troublemakers looking for an outlet for whatever energies they have not expended creatively. And I truly feel for the people who were protesting for George Floyd and the injustice that took place, because it's true. They were protesting peacefully, and we saw that downtown until looters came and there were records that showed these were out of towners. They were not locals that broke into shops. And of course there were some locals who, when they saw the opportunity, were like, oh, well, it's been broken into, maybe we should just go join the party, whatever. But yeah, they were not locals at all. And so when Idaho heard about it, they were like, well, we're ready, come. And no one came. So, yeah.
I mean, how much of this do you feel could be fixed by leadership, for example? Because not just in the United States, but throughout the entire world over the last four months or so, I just feel like there's been a void of leadership in general. Yeah. Like it's just been a nightmare in the United Kingdom. There are memes about, how the government has managed this situation, which are really hilarious. And it's just unfortunate that, we don't have in here a better leadership right now. But what about over there? I mean, with things like Antifa and that kind of thing.
Wasn't it recently the anniversary of Brexit? A few days ago, maybe yesterday? Yeah,
it's been, well, I'm not sure if there's an extension to, I think there is, to actually having officially left.
Yeah.
But I feel like a lot of it is to do with the fact that, well, it's a lot more difficult than we thought it was going to be. And this was never really the choice of the government. I feel like the government would have preferred to just stay in the European Union.
Okay.
But when the previous prime minister made a mistake by saying publicly that...
Is that Cameron?
Yes, he would give the public the chance to vote on whether they should leave or stay. I mean, that unearthed a huge can of worms. And he never saw it coming, and everyone. So now we just had to do it. And there was a large debate about whether we should have we should go back on things and, just stay anyway. But it was going against democracy, basically. So you couldn't do that.
People.
What was that, Brendan?
Isn't the right way to go about it, though, just to ask the people what they'd want to do? Because that's a big decision.
Like a consensus.
Yeah. No, this is a good question. And I also feel the same way, but only if the people are educated. Because it's just like children. You can ask them what they want to do, and they'll probably go with the short-term benefit choice, right? Which is like to have the candy right now. But what they don't realize is if they do that every single time, they're going to fucking lose their teeth and they're going to go obese and they might get diabetes, whatever, right? So you got to educate them. And sometimes it's really difficult to educate people. Like sometimes people just don't get it. Yeah. And it is a really interesting question. Like, where do you draw the line between kind of trying to keep things from people for their best interests and like literally keeping things from people for your best interests? It's a very hard thing to manage. But I think it's built on the back of a strong sense of service to the community and ethics.
Selflessness, right?
Selflessness. And I feel like with the intertwining of, private interests and, greed obviously plays a huge part in both the government of the United States and the United Kingdom. I just feel like there's a lot more going on behind the scenes than literally civil servants serving the people.
Yeah. Good point. Very good point. And I remember earlier you said, is it a leadership thing? And as much as that would be the easier answer to give, I feel like it's really a family values thing, because family is a basic unit of society. And if you look at the earlier days of America, like George Washington, Benjamin Franklin. I mean, obviously Americans came from Europe, right? A lot of them were British. A lot of them were from England. The way that they were taught, they were homeschooled. They didn't have these fancy schools or daycare centers. They were homeschooled. They were taught by their mothers and they were taught by their fathers. And if you actually do some research and look for the papers that they wrote, kids, my son just turned 9, and the papers they used to write at that age were just like, what? They had such a wide vocabulary, their syntax, their lexicon, so rich. And honestly, I can only attribute that to the English, the British language. Of course, Americans would hate that. But the truth is, when the family took the brunt of that responsibility to educate and equip, I feel like the children were more ready to understand how life worked. Growing up.
Well, there were
in the
less
90s,
distractions for sure.
Yes, and less coddling. When I grew up in the 90s, there were no car seats. I mean, we had seatbelts, but we never wore them. 5 children in the back seat of like a station wagon. And it was just like, if there were speed bumps, you were up in the air and back down on the seats. It wasn't, we were not namby-pamby. We were not snowflakes. I mean, God, we survived the 80s and the 90s. And yet here we are, 2020. And if you ever were a fan of Conan O'Brien, do you guys remember where he had, in the year 2000, he had that segment?
Right.
Do you remember that, Brandon?
I do. I love Conan O'Brien.
I love him so. I wanted to be Conan, like the Asian Conan O'Brien, right? But like, we had such visions of the future where it would be amazing, all these advances, but instead, here we are. Everyone is as sensitive as a freaking snowflake in the middle of July. So it's tough. It's really tough. But I feel like the responsibility, the onus, is on the family unit. With parents spending less time with their children because they have to work more, they are instilling less in their children's lives. And that is something that my husband and I have consciously made every effort to invest in. He works remote, so I'm fortunate. And I'm finally, for the first time in my life, a full-time housewife. Whereas I've been working since I was 17, and then I was a single mom for 6.5 years. To now be able to intentionally be home and take care of my husband and my son, huge difference in perspective. I've learned so much. I was so humbled in the past 3 years. Like, shit, I thought I knew it all. Apparently I didn't. So yeah, I think if families were more present and spent more time together and molded values together, leadership would have less of the load. Because things like this, like how you are as a person, how I am as a person, that's not the government's responsibility. It's our family's responsibility. Those values would have had to be instilled in us to make us into productive, useful, and contributing citizens. And the government, the leadership, their only responsibility is to lay down the laws and put down the rules and make sure everything's hunky-dory and peachy keen. But in terms of your own personal perspective, your values, your motivations and convictions, that all starts in the home.
That's how people are molded too, or at least how people are molded. And Rockefeller developed the modern educational system, and then all of a sudden you went from a 1-to-1 teacher-student ratio, mother and son or daughter, or father, son and daughter, learning values at home, being educated at home, to a 1-in-30 teacher-to-student ratio, where you have one person who you idolize as knowing everything about a certain subject, and you have 30, 40 students in a class not getting the attention they deserve or being molded. And you have a very different effect. You have more of a herd effect rather than, being able to talk and debate and argue. You lose a lot of that. You lose a lot of value building, and you get a lot of people that kind of just follow whatever the agenda is. Right. And that created, I think, bigger divides, especially in America. And that created a lot of problems through the educational system, or, like I like to call it the institutional educational system.
Yeah, agreed.
So a lot of issues.
Wow. We could dive into any one of these like little sub conversations we've started and have a whole episode for them.
Good luck editing, guys.
Yeah, I know, right? Oh no, we're good. I'm just gonna this is gonna go raw. This is how people need to hear it.
I have to say, I have not been 3 sheets to the wind at 12:50 in the daytime. Right?
Well, this is what we do to all of our guests. We always make sure they go away with a smile. That's basically what we do.
I have to say, in the past 4 years, this is the first time I've had a good buzz like this early in the day, and I wasn't on the beach.
Oh, right. Yeah. Speaking of which, like when I get back to Medellin, I'm booking a flight to Cartagena. Like seriously.
Whoa. Wow. Okay. So
long.
Without me?
Dude, man, I'm literally inviting you. That's what I'm doing right now.
You're his date, Brandon.
It looks like.
I don't even know what it looks like, bro. But I know it's.
Hey, so if like my husband and I want to go visit Colombia, we should all meet up. Like we know nothing. I could probably. Yeah, no, we need to do it. Like whenever this whole thing lifts, the travel ban.
I live down here. Clement will be back pretty soon. Yeah. Bring your husband. Definitely come down. You guys would love it. Colombia's beautiful. It really is.
Absolutely.
I look. So I guess the algorithms are smart, but there are only like the 3 same people who are at the top of my stories list and feeds, and Clem's one of them. And I'm no, it's true. Like I'm always like responding, and I feel like, God, he must be so annoyed with me right now. But apparently, you and I have a lot more common friends now, Clem. And they're like, oh, Clem. I'm like, yeah, it's hazy now how we met, but he's a stand-up guy. Like, I love him. And it's funny. A friend of mine said, "Did you guys date?" And I'm like, if I were a magic 8-ball, my answer would be, answers are hazy, ask again later. just because I feel like a friend. Do you know what I mean? Like I feel like the friendship is so much stronger than the romantic atmosphere that was there. And I feel like you and I were in such a different place and headspace at that time. Yeah,
absolutely. 100%. Like,
can I tell you something though? Yeah. Something popped up on my Facebook memories.
Was it us?
Yeah, it was. And my friend goes, "Remember this night? Your date was that guy who looked like Joseph Gordon-Levitt."
Yeah. I get that. A lot. Yeah. That's a recurring theme in my life.
I remember that. You were with a client somewhere, and you came back for me because you and I had to attend 2 different events.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I think I remember now.
You took me to my event and you went to yours. And when you were done, you came to mine to come pick me up and make sure I was safe. But it was so funny because then my other girlfriends were like, "Oh, he's kind of cute, but you're dating him." And I'm like, we're not anything right now. We're just like getting to know each other. So is that how good a person I am? Where I'm like, even if it was a date I was on, I'm like, but if you feel like you're meant for each other, I'll gladly step out of it.
I think that's really going above and beyond from what most people would say and do. Yeah.
Also not a woman thing to do, but yeah.
Well, stereotypes are meant to be broken, right?
True. But I feel like it's so strange. People wonder, like, how do you stay friends with an ex or someone you used to date? I'm like,
it's easy.
Yeah,
so easy.
Exactly. I'm like, easy. Get over your ego.
It's only difficult if you have a problem with it. And if you have a problem with it, then you need to figure out why you have a problem with it.
Then that's your problem. Yeah, exactly.
That's your problem. Oh, so true. And I mean, definitely, I know that you have grown a lot. I mean, damn.
That means a lot to me coming from you.
Well, I think it really, it's really interesting to, and I say this to everyone that I talk to about this. if we could just somehow give people the opportunity to go and travel, as they're developing, even if after they're developing, like you're always developing, I guess, but after those essential years, give them a chance to go and experience new cultures and things, it would be absolutely world changing, because there's a lot of closed-mindedness, obviously. And if you just really knew what it's like on the side that you're against, like you said before, that when you moved to America, you realized what it was really like to live there and to have the support of your government and things and the mayor and whatever. I mean, you could start to see things in a more whole view. I think there's a lot of things missing from people's views, and that's normal. But to think that that's the actual truth of the situation is a lie. And that's why scientists are so amazing, and we don't give them enough credit, because everything they do is just subject to intense scrutiny. And, if you do scientific journalism, then at least you're trying to be as unbiased as possible and open to as criticism as possible. And I mean, that comes from something, right? It comes from understanding that. So culturally, like you and I mean, and also Brandon too, living in Colombia right now. I mean, we're subject to just different ways of thinking and living, and it helps understand how things work.
It does. I mean, they say the brain doesn't stop developing until you're like 27 or 28. So.
Oh, shoot.
Uh-oh. Fuck.
I'm screwed.
I feel like it's just my own brain telling me that things are changing, but it's not really.
Is it my brain or is it the alcohol?
We're like, it's like you're 12 years past your developmental phase, but don't worry.
You better shut your mouth when I'm talking to you.
Oh my God, this was an amazing conversation. Cheers, guys. Cheers. And I know you've just had a swig of that, but.
I did. I got the lime rind in my mouth too.
I think yours was probably the tastiest out of all of the cocktails.
Oh, it's so good. So I've never had a green thumb ever, but I decided to try and grow my own herbs, and I've been making crazy, like simple.
Wow.
It's just the sweetest, like, honey, whatever plant you want to buy, go ahead and do it. And I'm like, well, shit. Okay. Challenge accepted. So I have like a little mini jungle here. And when Clem told me, it would be great if we could share cocktail recipes, I was on it, like white on rice. So I've made like rosemary syrup and all these things. And it's just,
did you put it in the cocktail just now? Like you?
So the rosemary works extremely well with a whiskey because it's a heartier herb. If you're working with something like tequila, you want hearty herbs as well. You don't want to do basil. You want to do something like lavender. You want to do. My rosemary is taking so freaking long to grow for some reason. I don't know why. But
hold on a second, because you're talking like you're telling me something totally new. Like I've never thought about this before. You're saying you take a herb and you make a syrup with it?
Yeah. So it's equal parts sugar and water, but I have a sugar-free family due to my mandate. So I use monk fruit. Which is so I love monk fruit because erythritol has a minty aftertaste. Stevia has a bitter aftertaste. And aspartame, those are bad for you. So I go for monk fruit.
Would you say stevia is bad or?
Well, I don't like stevia because of the bitter aftertaste, but stevia is good for you because it's plant-based, right?
Yes.
You don't want to go for Splenda because they have, what's the word? God, I've got a good healthy buzz going, so I can't find the word. But the sugar base that the stevia and the Splenda and Equal all have are they're not good for you. Studies have shown that they could lead to cancer, a higher. You know what I mean? Like you could be more prone to cancer. But so I try to use plant-based sweeteners, which my favorite has been monk fruit because it does not have the minty aftertaste of erythritol. Anyway, so if you take a sprig of rosemary and you have equal parts water and sugar and you boil them together and you let them soak overnight after boiling for, say, 15, 20 minutes, and you put that in with your, I think I did it with whiskey. Yeah. Oh my God. So good.
Okay, I'm gonna try it actually.
Yeah, I know,
water?
really.
Like just a little bit of water, and then half sugar. Equal sugar.
So if you have like a half cup of water, then it's a half cup of sugar. If you're not really, yeah, and if you're not fussy, just use castor sugar, like granulated white sugar. Right. But if you're fussy and you're on a diet, whatever, then use like whatever sweetener has a 1-to-1 equivalent of castor sugar.
Right.
Yeah. And then there's also, remember I talked to you about using turmeric and ginger? That goes so well with gin. So what we're doing right now, I did grated ginger, and you could boil that with water, the whole simple syrup thing. Store it, like put it in a mason jar and put it in the fridge. It is amazing. Put some cardamom pods in there. So if you have turmeric root and some jalapeno, oh my God, amazing. You guys need to come over because I'm always making these drinks and no one's drinking them with me.
Yeah. That sounds like a plan for sure. Actually, I'm supposed to go to Las Vegas at some point. I would imagine, like being invited. So we should do that and then head over down Washington direction.
No. So can you tell me when you're all going to be in Vegas at the same time? Because we love Vegas and we will come down.
Absolutely.
Is it up? Is it down?
I do live there, so we could probably time this out and make it happen.
Yeah, no, for sure. I've got friends in Vegas and this needs to happen. We need to make a video, a podcast, if you will, like in person of us in Vegas.
Yeah. That's the best way to do it. We should totally do that.
On the ground reporting in Vegas.
Live.
At getting shot.
Oh my God. You know, it's so funny. They were like,
your screen right now looks like a painting. Looks like one of those Michelangelo murals with the light shining through the cloud.
Is it Brendan or me?
Yeah, Brandon, you know, like
oh yeah.
Of light coming through.
So dramatic.
It is dramatic.